different things about alcohol in the Quran. There are about 4 sayings about it, which I think get progressively more hard line. I'm not entirely certain about that, but this is the sort of thing, and it's in its way it's as diverse as this, and it's therefore I think the explanation that's been offered for why you get extreme Islamism in the form it's taking today is that bit more sort of relevant and powerful when you think of what it's come out of. The Islamic courts were in medieval times were sort of hothouses of scholarship in ways which might have been the envy of European medieval courts, or put them to shame. Probably couldn't say that now, but there we are. Things change, and in some ways, the more they change, the more they stay the same. But having said all this, how do you think, or how does anybody else in this room think, that all this is likely to develop? We've had the blowing up of the demolition of the Twin Towers. We've had the London Underground bombings. Goodness knows what else somebody might have in store for us, or for Americans, or for French people, or whatever. What might be the next thing to happen, or how might this whole movement continue, or resolve itself, or come to a halt, or whatever?
Well, let's try and tease out a few things. This business about the role of the BBC World Service in the Iranian Revolution, I'll leave that to others. That's an interesting possibility, but it could be executives in the World Service saying, well, look, it is part of our remit to report everything that's going on, and the fact that it has adverse effects to the interests of other people who might wish us not to say anything, shouldn't deter us from giving people information. I mean, you could say it might have been some kind of dark and devious plot on, but without evidence, I wouldn't like to say one way or the other. To come to the Quran, I mean, I've never even read all the way through, so the Quran, I'm not expert or anything. It's a book I've dipped into. A couple of things about it. As you say, it has a strange structure. Unlike the Bible, where you can point out a fairly strong narrative thread through the Bible, the Quran is just a sort of fairly random seeming collection of sayings, and provides no evidence but lots of threats. Because it's not the only source for Islamic thought. A lot of debate in the world of Islam, arguments are supported not by what the Quran says, but what the Prophet Muhammad is said to have said by his companions. They're called the Hadith, and these are collected together and used to, where the Quran doesn't come up to scratch, the Hadith are sort of called in as supporting evidence. This business of the Wahhabis, from what little I know about them, they're an example of a very strong reaction by people who are insecure. They find themselves in a changing world. They don't like. They're affected by external economic forces, and they lay hands on the best kind of defence they've got. And in their case, it was a much stronger interpretation, a much more cruel in many ways, according to some accounts, interpretation of the Quran and the way that Muslims should behave. And finally, I'm not in the business of predictions, I'm afraid. I wouldn't possibly hazard a guess. You know, that the only thing you can say about the future is it hasn't happened yet.
Which is why we can't remember.
But I would, yes, I would say make one or two observations. The most important one, I think, to bear in mind is compare the Islamist movement today with the communist movement worldwide of former year, you know, the 30s and 40s and 50s, where the communist movement was a powerful opposition to all kinds of regimes and states, much better organised, much more threatening than you know, today's Islamists who, you know, in desperation have turned to murdering themselves to get their point across.
Brought in, and before you know it, another reform is needed to reform that reform. And you know, the fact that the Taliban broke away or fought against the Mujahideen couldn't have been predicted, but nevertheless, it was the result of the intervention of the two major world powers in Afghanistan. So I think that sort of supports the idea that what's happening in the Islamic world today is sort of part of the law of, if you like, unintended consequences. How it gets resolved, it's difficult to know. But I think what you said about the communist, in the sense of the Soviet world, is right. I mean, that seemed to provide an enormous threat to the West, very much in the same way as Islamism is doing today. And it was much better organised. Islamism isn't very well organised, really. It's got hold of a lot of people's minds, but how firmly it's got hold of those people's minds is actually quite hard to know.
In its early years, the Muslim, when they burst out of Arabia, the Muslims were extremely tolerant. They just imposed a tax on unbelievers and others who didn't Muslim, and they encouraged schools and universities and this thing. Was in the early days of Islamic Empire, and of course there was a split in the caliphate, because one guy set himself up in Spain as a caliph, and another one in Baghdad or Damascus as a caliph. They hated each other's guts.
It's a bit like the Catholic Orthodox, but
It's like the split in the papacy. At one stage there were two popes.